All right, welcome to this video. We are going to be reviewing for our Unit 2 Political Systems exam. We're going to start with theocracy, which was a form of government that we looked at in ancient Egypt. Theocracy is a government controlled by religious leaders. When we looked at Egypt in particular, we looked at their pharaohs, which was the name that they gave their kings. Ancient Egyptians believed that their pharaoh, or their king, was also a god. On the right, you see a picture of social hierarchy in ancient Egypt. At the top, with the most power, is the pharaoh. And then all the way down at the bottom, we have slaves. This is a pretty typical looking pyramid for a social hierarchy. In the middle, we have merchants, artisans, other middle class people. But it's important to remember that the pharaoh maintained all power in this society. The Nile River is a very important river that runs through the middle of Egypt. It was used in many ways and a very important part of ancient Egyptian life. It was used for drinking, it was used for traveling and trading with other areas. It was also used for irrigation systems, so a way to get water to their crops to grow those. So it was a very important central part of ancient Egyptian life. Next up, we have our dynastic cycle, and we looked at ancient China for this. So I'm going to walk you through the dynastic cycle. So dynastic cycle starts with a dynasty. So a new dynasty takes power, and they're going to claim that they have the mandate of heaven. Now, the mandate of heaven in Chinese history is thought to be like a divine approval, meaning that the gods have given their approval for this dynasty to be in power. So this new dynasty will claim that they have the mandate of heaven, or they have the approval from the gods to rule, and they're going to establish peace and prosperity, and things are going to go really well for a while. The people are all going to believe they have the mandate of heaven. Over time, most dynasties would start to weaken in some way. Sometimes they would become corrupt. Sometimes the taxes would be raised. Something that's going to make their power grow a little bit weaker, and people are going to start to distrust them. Then some kind of a disaster will happen, like a flood or a famine, meaning there's no food to eat, or peasants revolt, or an invasion occurs. Now, this is just a naturally occurring event most of the time, but the ancient Chinese believed that this was a sign from the gods, that their old ruler, or the old dynasty, has lost the mandate of heaven. So now any type of rebellion is justified. So they feel like they can overthrow the dynasty. A new group will overthrow that dynasty and come to power, and they'll now be the new dynasty, and then our cycle starts all over again. Next up, we have direct democracy. We looked at ancient Athens, which was a city-state in Greece. Direct democracy is a government in which citizens rule directly rather than through representatives. So this means in a direct democracy that citizens are voting on particular issues or laws or rules that they would like to have in place. The problem with Athenian democracy, however, is that it had many limits, meaning that it wasn't totally a fair democratic system. So, for example, only free-born male citizens whose parents were Athenians could vote. Women could not vote, children couldn't vote, slaves, foreigners could not vote. So there were many limits to Athenian democracy. Next up, we have representative democracy, and we looked at the Roman Republic for this. So a representative democracy is also often referred to as a republic, and it's a form of government in which power is in the hands of representatives, and leaders are elected by citizens who have the right to vote. This is very similar to the system of government that we have here in the United States. So in a representative democracy, citizens get to vote for leaders or representatives to make decisions for them. There were two social classes in the Roman Republic. We have the patricians and the plebeians. The patricians held most of the power in the Roman Republic. They got to have the really high government positions. Initially, they were the only ones that had all of the power. Eventually, the plebeians are going to get some power, but it's just important to note that there was definitely a social hierarchy and that the patricians held more power than the plebeians. One important thing that comes out of this time period as well to note are the 12 tables. So the 12 tables were laws that were recorded and written down. And this was really important because this is the first time in Rome that laws were actually written down. So it was made public and able or allowed everyone to see and know the laws. So it ensured the rights of all citizens. Next up, we're going to look at an empire. We looked at the Roman Empire in class. So an empire is a political unit in which a number of people or countries are controlled by a single ruler. Empires are going to be usually very large to be considered an empire. So the Roman Empire is going to begin with this guy, Julius Caesar. So he, at the end of the Roman Republic, is going to take control as their leader and claim that he is the dictator and he is going to rule for life. He doesn't get to rule for very long because he is murdered by a group of conspirators or people that wanted to see him gone. So after he dies, then his successor is going to be this guy. His name is Octavian, but once he becomes the new ruler, he calls himself Augustus Caesar, or the heir to Caesar. He is going to start the Roman Empire, and it expands from there. And he begins a period of time in Roman history known as the Pax Romana. So when he starts ruling, and then for the next 200 years, we see a time period of peace and prosperity in Rome. And the Roman Empire continues to grow and grow, as you can see in this map. Everything in the red area is a part of the Roman Empire when it gets to its largest point. So it is including parts of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. The decline of Rome, so the reasons that Rome fell or causes, there were a lot of reasons which are listed here. If you want, you can pause this video at this point and read through all of these, but just know that there were many things. The empire was divided into an east and a west. It became too big to rule. The armies just weren't as well trained as they used to be. There was a lot of disease, so the population declined. There were a lot of invasions from the outside. The economy wasn't doing well, lots of different reasons, but eventually Rome falls. Okay, another system we looked at was feudalism, and we looked at an example of this in medieval Europe. So it's a political system in which nobles are granted the use of lands that belong to their king, and in exchange they're going to give loyalty, military service, and protection to the people who live on the land. So this is our reciprocal or our give and take relationship. So, for example, the king is going to give land to the lords, and then in return, the lords give their loyalty back to the king. Then the lords are going to give some of that land to the knights, and in return, the knights are going to protect the lord and everyone that lives on the land. The serfs or the peasants are at the bottom. They're going to be the ones doing all of the agricultural work and labor on the farms. They do this in exchange for a place to live, some food to eat, and protection from the knights. Okay, we looked at absolutism in Western Europe. So absolutism or an absolute ruler is a king or a queen who has unlimited power and seeks to control all aspects of society. They usually claim divine rights. So this is similar to like the mandate of heaven under the dynastic cycle. So to claim divine right means that you are claiming that a god has given you the power to rule. So Louis XIV was our example that we looked at. He was this king of France. He was also often referred to as the Sun King. He lived a very lavish life and really liked expensive things. He built this massive palace called Versailles. And he did so to show off his power and wealth. And then finally, we have totalitarianism. We looked at Russia, particularly when Stalin was ruling. Totalitarianism is a government that controls every single aspect of public and private life. Some of the key traits of totalitarianism are on this wheel here. So again, you can pause this video now if you'd like to read through all of those. But understand that in a totalitarian government, that ruler controls everything in your personal life, in your public life, everything from the job that you have to what is taught in schools to what you see on TV and the internet. And then particularly the example we were looking at was when Joseph Stalin was ruling in Russia, and he did all of these things. His biggest method of enforcement was using police terror to kind of scare people and keep them following his rules. And that's it. That's the end of our review. Feel free to watch this as many times as you need to, and happy studying.